Clara Sutton awoke to the soft hum of bees outside her window, a lullaby she had grown so used to that she hardly noticed it anymore. It was a sound that reminded her of home, from collecting her first swarm with her grandfather to starting her own small apiary on the outskirts of Rosehip Ridge. She'd always known she wanted to follow in her grandfather's footsteps, caring for the bees that provided the sweetest gift to their town. Honey. Early morning light filtered through the lace curtains, rousing her from bed. Today promised to be a busy day, but Clara didn't mind. Tending to her bees was never just a job, but a way of life. After quickly dressing in jeans, a flannel shirt, and her worn-out boots, she headed out to check the hives. The cool spring air brushed against her cheeks. Overhead, a few feathery clouds streaked across a pale blue sky. The orchard next door was in full bloom, its delicate white blossoms shimmering with morning dew. A gentle breeze carried their faint perfume. As Clara approached her largest hive, she noticed a small slip of paper tucked under a brick. Her heart gave a startled thump. Notes were not unusual. Locals sometimes left random questions or well-wishes for her. But this note felt different. The moment she saw it, its edges were crisp, and it was folded with precision, as though whoever placed it wanted her to think it was important. She removed the brick and carefully unfolded the note. A neat, looping scrawl read, "Old honey flows through these aisles, lost but never forgotten. Churn the memory, find the gold." It gave no signature, no indication of who had written it. She glanced around, half expecting someone to appear from behind a bush, but there was only the sound of bumblebees buzzing in the orchard. Puzzled, Clara slipped it into her pocket and carried on inspecting the hive. The bees seemed calm and healthy, their frames shimmering with fresh honey. Everything about them was business as usual, but Clara's mind spun. A cryptic message about honey? Whose memory needed stirring? She resolved to puzzle over it later, setting aside her curiosity until she'd finished her chores. The day passed quietly. She tended to her remaining hives, stocking up on sugar syrup for the new brood and ensuring there were enough pollen patties to strengthen the young colony. Soon, the bees would source everything they needed from blooming clover, goldenrod, and orchard blossoms, but early spring often needed a careful boost. By noon, the sun grew warm, prompting a short break. Clara retreated inside, washing her hands before pouring herself a tall glass of iced tea. While sipping it, she couldn't resist pulling out the note. She kept reading it over and over. There was something about the words, "lost but never forgotten," that made her think of an old rumor in Rosehip Ridge, some storied honey reserve that disappeared decades ago. Allegedly the best honey the region had ever produced, but most folks dismissed it as a local legend. Her grandfather used to talk about that honey reserve. He'd claimed it came from secret hives perched high in a hidden glen near the heart of the orchard. The rumor went that one autumn all the hives vanished overnight, along with gallons of honey. Whenever Clara asked for details, her grandfather would say it was better left in the past. Maybe it was the figment of an overactive imagination, or so he insisted. Now, faced with the cryptic note, Clara wondered if there was more truth to the story than she'd previously believed. If so, why was someone hinting at it now? She was uncertain, but a strange buzz of anticipation told her she should find out. The next day dawned early. Clara's routine brought her back to the orchard's edge, where her hives stood in tidy rows. As she went through her inspection, her eyes flickered to the bricks on top of each hive, half expecting another note. After she spotted none on the first two hives, she told herself not to be disappointed. Maybe it was just a one-time prank, but at the third hive she gasped. Another folded slip was neatly wedged between two wooden slats. She pulled it out, heart pounding. The note read in the same looping handwriting, "Secrets sweet as honey lie buried in the orchard's bones. Seek the root cellar." Rosehip Ridge's orchard was always a cornerstone of the community, changing hands through the years but never losing its charm. It spanned dozens of acres, teeming with rows of apple, pear, and cherry trees. Once upon a time, there had been a modest root cellar on the property, used for storing produce through the winter. Clara recalled stumbling across its weathered door as a child, but she doubted it was used these days. She carefully pocketed the note, determined to pay a visit to that long-forgotten cellar. Yet she couldn't shake a tingle of dread. Root cellars had an otherworldly atmosphere, full of musty darkness where secrets might indeed lie hidden. Later that afternoon, Clara locked up her workshop and made her way across the orchard. She strolled between rows of apple saplings until the older, more gnarled trees came into view. Here the branches twisted like arthritic hands, and the grass on the orchard floor grew thick. Eventually, she spotted the low-slung wooden door, half buried in the ground. Rusty hinges told a story of neglect. She tugged at the handle, which groaned in protest like an old dog woken from a nap, and managed to pry the door open far enough to slip through. Inside, cobwebs draped the low ceiling. The earthen floor was cool beneath her boots, and the musty smell made her cough. Clara pulled out her phone and switched on its flashlight. The cellar wasn't very big, but it contained rows of wooden shelves, stacked with dusty jars that had once held preserves. She ventured deeper, scanning the shadows. Nothing looked remotely like honey or a clue, yet the sense that she was waist-deep in an old puzzle coursed through her. She looked behind the shelves, rummaging around for hidden compartments or anything unusual. Finally, at the back of the cellar, she noticed a chunk of wood that jutted out from the wall. It appeared to be part of a tiny door. Holding her breath, she tugged gently at the worn handle. The piece of wood creaked open, revealing a small nook just large enough to fit a few jars. She aimed her light inside but found only a scrap of paper, damp around the edges. Her heart thumped as she retrieved the paper. In the same neat writing, it read, "Nearly there. The orchard has eyes. Follow the hidden path." Taped to the back of the note was a small photograph, black and white, showing an ancient beehive stand, half swallowed by undergrowth. The style of the hive looked older than any Clara had seen in person, triangular and quaint. In the background she glimpsed a huge oak tree with a distinctive cleft in its trunk. It had to be somewhere in the orchard. Adrenaline sparked in her veins. For the first time, she wondered if she was chasing a ghost story or an actual piece of Rosehip Ridge's heritage that had never been recovered. Clara emerged from the cellar, consumed with curiosity and brimming with questions. Who was planting these notes for her to find? Was it someone who wanted to remain anonymous, but still share the orchard's old secret? Or was there a more sinister reason behind it all, like the old honey reserve being valuable enough to spark wrongdoing? Rosehip Ridge was a peaceful town, a place where neighbors helped neighbors. She struggled to imagine any local purposefully orchestrating a grand scheme, yet the best mysteries often festered in the most tranquil settings. Before twilight fell, she decided to take the photograph to Doris Green, the local librarian and de facto historian of Rosehip Ridge. Doris was a sprightly woman in her 70s, whose memory was sharper than a stinging bee. She insisted old stories were a town's foundation. The library was quiet when Clara stepped in, the hush of dust motes swirling in beams of fading sunlight. Doris greeted her with a warm smile. "Evening, Clara. You're here late, dear. Need a book on beekeeping?" "I have something else in mind," Clara said, pulling out the photograph. She explained the notes, the orchard's root cellar, and her suspicion about the missing honey reserve from decades ago. Doris's lively eyes widened, and she examined the photograph carefully. "Oh, I recognize this oak," Doris said, tapping the photo. "It's near the orchard's southwestern corner. You know, where the wild blackberries grow? That used to be a part of the orchard before they let it go wild. I also see a small building in the background, but it's so faded." Clara peered closely, noting what might be the outline of a small cabin or shed. Doris stood from her chair and glided to a filing cabinet. She flipped through a stack of old property documents, eventually retrieving a map of the orchard from the mid-20th century. Together they spotted the southwestern corner where a cluster of small structures had once been indicated. "Just perhaps," Doris mused, "these notes are directing you there, but who would leave them, and why?" She patted Clara's hand gently. "Be careful, dear. Sometimes secrets are resurrected for reasons we can't guess. If you need help, you know where to find me." Clara left the library with renewed determination. She carefully noted the location of the southwestern corner, planning to head there first thing the next day. Rosy dusk was descending over the orchard as she walked home, the last rays of sun gilding the blossoms. The comforting buzz of honeybees was replaced by the chirr of crickets, and the night air smelled faintly of lavender from a nearby farm. Sleep was restless that night, with her mind swirling over the cryptic messages, her grandfather's old tales, and the possibility that the rumor of a hidden honey reserve was more than just talk. At sunrise, Clara donned her work clothes, grabbed a light breakfast, and set out with a small backpack stuffed with essentials: gloves, a flashlight, water, and a pair of garden shears, just in case the underbrush was thick. By mid-morning she was poking her way through a tangle of blackberry brambles on the southwestern edge of the orchard. The area had indeed gone wild. Branches brushed her arms, and the ground was uneven with fallen logs. Occasionally, she spotted a withered orchard tag on a battered tree, a reminder that this was once cultivated land. She paused to catch her breath, searching for the distinctive oak tree shown in the photograph. Then she saw it. A giant oak, easily centuries old, sporting a large cleft in its trunk. Various lumps of moss clung to its bark, and a hollow space yawned beneath one of its thick roots. Nearby, she glimpsed a rotted wooden stand leaning precariously against the trunk. It looked very much like the old hive stand from the photograph. She felt a flutter of excitement. Carefully, she moved toward it. A hush blanketed the space, as though even the birds were waiting for what she might uncover. She peered under the stand. No new note, no honey barrel, nothing obvious. Next, she swung the flashlight beam into the hollow space by the oak's roots. There, nestled in a bed of rotting leaves, she spotted a tattered beekeeping ledger. The cover was so worn that the title was barely legible. Clara gently picked it up, dusting off debris. Inside, she could make out columns listing hive inventory, honey yields, and harvest times, all penned in meticulous cursive. The last few pages, though stained, were covered with frantic scribbles about stolen colonies, hastily relocated hives, and references to trusted watchers. She turned a page and found yet another slip of paper in that same looping script. "This is your final clue, Clara," it read. "What was lost must be found. The orchard's caretaker knows more than he lets on. Trust your bee's intuition." Clara's pulse raced at the mention of her own name. So this wasn't just a random puzzle left for anyone. It was specifically meant for her. She recognized the orchard's caretaker was Henry Hastings, a quiet man who'd arrived in town about 6 years back. He was generally well-liked, though somewhat private. Ledger in hand, Clara made her way out of the grove. Thoughts churned. Was Henry behind these notes, or was someone else implicating him? And what role did he play in the puzzle of the missing honey? She recalled that Henry had occasionally asked her for pointers about bees, though he'd never expressed interest beyond idle curiosity. Her next step was clear: pay Henry a visit. Her heart pounded as she walked to the caretaker's cottage, a cozy yellow house near the main entrance of the orchard. A few chickens pecked at the earth outside, and steam rose from the caretaker's compost heap near the garden fence. She rapped on the door. Henry opened it, a surprised look on his weathered face. He was middle-aged, with broad shoulders and kind eyes, wearing a plaid shirt and suspenders. "Clara," he greeted. "Something I can help you with?" She lifted the beekeeping ledger. "Henry, do you know anything about this? I found it near the old oak on the southwestern end. It references stolen hives. I've been getting these cryptic notes. Someone is nudging me to uncover the orchard's lost honey reserve." Henry stepped aside, inviting her in. The cottage smelled of fresh-baked bread, and the living room was cluttered with gardening tools and a pile of fruit crates. Clara sat on a worn couch while Henry studied the ledger, lines of concern creeping across his brow. "This ledger was my father's," he said softly. "His work in these orchards decades ago, when they were owned by the Thatcher family. He told me stories about a secret honey operation set up by the Thatchers. They wanted to breed a hardy strain of bees that produced incredible honey. But, as you've read, those hives mysteriously disappeared. My father was heartbroken. He'd poured his soul into caring for them. When the orchard ownership changed, Dad kept these records, but insisted I never spread rumors." Henry set the ledger back on the table, exhaling heavily. "I hadn't seen these old notes in years. I swear I didn't leave them around for you." Clara nodded slowly. "But someone else clearly wants me to find the missing honey reserve, or at least solve the mystery of its disappearance. Do you have any idea who might be behind this?" Henry rubbed his chin. "I can't say for sure, but a while back I found fresh footprints near the southwestern corner. I thought it was just a curious neighbor or some kids playing. Maybe it was the note leaver. My guess is it could be an old family friend or someone connected to the orchard's past. As for me, I'd love the orchard to be recognized for more than apples and pears. If that honey strain still exists in some hidden place, it would be momentous for Rosehip Ridge." So the question remained, where exactly was the reserve? Clara wondered if old property records might pinpoint the hive's last known location. Another approach was to look for a hidden structure that served as a honey house. She decided to cross-represent the orchard map with Henry's father's ledger, scanning harvest dates and notes describing terrain where the hives had been placed. Some pages mentioned favorable windbreak from the ridge to the east and accelerated bloom near the hollow. None of the orchard's official paths aligned with these descriptions, suggesting a hidden clearing. After their discussion, Clara and Henry ventured out together, scouring the orchard for any sign of a collapsed building or a disguised area. They encountered thick brambles, tangled brush, and large stones that suggested a clearing might have long been reclaimed by nature. But a few hours later, frustration seeped in. They found no significant leads, only battered fences and toppled fence posts. As the sun sank, they decided to regroup and try again tomorrow. That evening, Clara flipped through the ledger while sitting on her porch. The bees hummed gently in their hives, silhouetted against a dying sunset. She discovered one final mention in the ledger. "The cottages on the orchard's rim hide the sing-song of honey." It was written with a flourish and seemed out of place in a practical ledger. Suddenly, a memory flashed. As a child, she'd heard rumors there was once a caretaker's cottage, unearthed inside a hillside near the orchard's rim, and rumored to be haunted. Now it all fit. If a caretaker's cottage had been built partially underground, it might have formed a natural place to store honey. She felt sure this was the clue. Before dawn, she alerted Henry, and they set off past the orchard's furthest boundaries, where the land rose into gentle hills. They trudged until they came across a low stone wall hugging the base of a hill. Vines draped over a wooden doorframe that sat flush with the slope. The structure was more than half buried. The door itself, swollen from years of moisture, gave way with effort, revealing darkness beyond. A faint buzzing teased Clara's ears, the unmistakable low hum of bees. Inside, the caretaker's cottage was musty and damp, the partial earthen walls giving it an otherworldly feel. A sliver of morning light penetrated through a crack in the roof. The constant hum grew louder. As they peered around, they found a row of old wooden crates. Henry pried one open, and his mouth dropped. Inside were metal canisters marked Honey Reserve. Opening one revealed a thick crystallized substance, decades-old honey. Another corner of the cottage housed a cluster of bees, surprisingly active, coming and going through a hole in the deteriorated wall. Clara's heart soared at the sight. They had found it, the missing honey reserve, and perhaps a living remnant of that special bee strain. Remarkable, Henry breathed, shining his flashlight around. Dust motes danced in the dank air. All these years, the orchard's greatest secret was hidden right here. But who helped lead us to it? A quiet shuffle made them both spin around. Standing in the dim doorway was a tall, thin figure in old-fashioned work clothes. At first, Clara's heart hammered against her ribcage, but once she got a better look, she recognized the kindly, weather-beaten face, none other than John Murray, an elder orchard hand who'd been drifting in and out of the community for decades. When he spoke, his voice was tremulous. "I was the last one left who knew where to find this place. My father was caretaker here before Henry's. I'd been slipping those notes to get you to come looking. It had to be someone who truly loved bees." The orchard owners kept failing to see the importance of this strain. They'd have damaged the purity of it by commercializing it. We thought it best to hide it until the right person came along. Clara's breath caught. Why all the secrecy? Why not just come to me directly? John leaned against the doorframe, his features softening with a rueful smile. "I was afraid you might not believe an old tale, or worse, that the orchard's new management might exploit it. But then I saw how you cared for your bees just like your grandfather. I knew I had to nudge you in the right direction. And Henry is a good man too. Now that you've found the honey, you can decrystallize it, see if the flavor still holds, and maybe see if these bees can be coaxed into new, healthier hives." Clara felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. There was something deeply moving about uncovering a piece of the orchard's forgotten history. She was also relieved that the orchard's caretaker, Henry, and the orchard hand, John, weren't at odds after all. The puzzle had come together in a far gentler fashion than she'd feared. This was a true testament to the close-knit nature of Rosehip Ridge. She approached the wild colony, noting how calm the bees were. The queen, if healthy, might produce a new brood that could be integrated into modern hives. She could carry on the lineage of a strain that thrived decades ago. Together, the three of them carefully transported a few frames from the hidden colony, along with a couple of the metal canisters, back to Clara's workshop. Over the next few days, they tested the honey's quality, finding it to be surprisingly robust, sweet and fragrant, with hints of the orchard's unique blooms. Word spread through town like a gentle breeze. Doris from the library exclaimed over the story, eventually documenting it for the local archives. The new orchard owner expressed delight at the discovery, promising to preserve the old orchard's heritage. She gave Henry her blessing to help Clara cultivate the hidden strain in new hives under carefully controlled conditions. On a sunny afternoon, Clara leaned against her workshop's door, watching her bees come and go as they always had. But now she felt something new, a link in a chain of beekeepers spanning generations. The orchard's lost honey was no longer a rumor, but a testament to her family's belief in the quiet magic of bees. While the puzzle had been solved, she knew the real mystery was in how something as small as a honeybee could unite people across time. John's cryptic notes, Henry's father's ledger, and Doris's local knowledge had all played a part in unveiling Rosehip Ridge's sweet secret. That evening she prepared a pot of tea for her visitors, Doris, Henry, and John, and set out some fresh bread spread with a drizzle of the newly recovered honey. They gathered around her kitchen table in companionable silence at first, savoring the taste. Clara smiled to see their faces light up. The honey was floral, caramel-like and rich, as though infused with the orchard's very soul. She was certain her grandfather would have been proud. When the conversation turned to the orchard's future potential tours and bee education workshops, Clara's heart swelled with pride and excitement. So many new possibilities had arisen from one old legend. Later, after her guests had departed, Clara strolled outside, gazing up at the star-filled sky. The orchard spread out below, bathed in moonlight. To think that for years all that honey had lain hidden, she let out a soft laugh. The bees, as always, were the real heroes. They perhaps knew all along how to find the sweetest path forward, just as the final note had suggested. With her breath forming a small cloud in the cool night, Clara felt thankful for the mystery that had landed on her doorstep. Sometimes the best secrets are the ones that join past and present in a gentle hum of discovery, and for that she would always be grateful.